Following the announcement of the OnePlus Open 2 not coming out this year and leaving us all in shock, I decided it would be wise to go ahead and do some research. So I've researched 9 different foldables that are available or will be available this year as an option if you were planning on getting the OnePlus Open 2. So let's go through them one by one. I'm going to give you some specs, and then I'm going to tell you a little bit about them and tell you how I feel about the device and whether it's something worth going for. So by the end of this video, you should have some idea of whether there's a good phone out there, or foldable that is, for you or not. Let's get to it. So let's start with the Vivo X Fold 3 Pro. Some of these have some long names, so I got to look at it to be sure I get it right. So this is a really nice phone. It has an 8.03-inch internal screen and a 6.53 external screen. So this is one of the largest screens of the foldables. And the Vivo comes with a Snapdragon 8 Gen 3 chip. So it's not the fastest chip out there right now, but still very competitive among the foldables. Now this phone does come with 12 gigabytes RAM up to 16, depending on which model you get. If you get the 256 gigabyte version, I'm sure that's where you get the 12 gigabytes storage. And then they have 512 gigabytes as well as 1 terabyte. I believe those larger ones, you'll get the 16 gigabytes of RAM. So if you get the base model to save money, you are going to lose on some RAM and not be among the higher end phones. Now this one has a triple camera setup, but it's a 50, a 64, and a 50. The 64 megapixel is their 3x zoom, so very like the OnePlus Open. And I believe that having that 64 does make it better, even though it's only 3 times. It still keeps up with the 5x zoom cameras, especially those that only have a 10 megapixel. Now this one also has some pretty powerful selfie cameras at 32 megapixels, so that's quite a bit there. I don't know if I don't want anybody seeing that much detail on this mug, but there you go. Now this one has a 5700 milliamp battery and one of the highest charging speeds with a wired at 100 watts, and the wireless is at 50 watts. So that's really fast charging. Now this one out of the box comes with Android 14 and is upgradable to Android 15. I don't know if it has it yet. Some of you out there that might have this phone, you can let me know. That's one thing OnePlus was very good at. The OnePlus Open already has Android 15. And their OS is called Fun Touch for international. I don't really know anything about that, so if you want to do some research, check out that Fun Touch and see if that's a good OS or right for you. Now this is not one of the thinnest phones. It's 5.2 unfolded and 11.2 millimeters folded. Now that does make it a little bit thinner than the OnePlus Open, and we'll get to that here shortly, but not quite as thin as the Pixel 9 Pro Fold. I don't know that you can really see the difference between the two, but it's in between those two, so it's going to look very similar. Now it's among a lighter one of these foldables, being 236 grams, but they're all really close, right in there around the same number. Now a lot of you say that this is the best phone out there and I should get it. What's holding me off is it does have the Snapdragon Gen 3 chip in it and an OS that I'm really not familiar with, so that makes me a little uncomfortable. Let me know what you think. Is this a great phone? It does have IPX8 water resistance, which means it can go into water for like 3 meters for just a few minutes, which is not something I would test out, but it means if you drop it in a puddle of water or even in a pool, you could probably retrieve it without any issues. Now moving on to the Honor Magic V3. This one's a 7.92-inch internal screen, so it's close enough to 8, and a 6.43-inch external screen, so a little bit smaller than the previous one. Now this one also has a Snapdragon 8 Gen 3 chip in it, so again, not completely up to date with the Elite, but still a fast phone. And what does also contribute to speed, the Honor has 12 gigabytes of RAM, but you can also get it up to 16 gigabytes of RAM, and it's probably, again, related to the storage that you get. Typically, what I've been finding is this one has the 256 gigabyte storage model, so that one's typically the 12 gigabytes of RAM. Some of them put 12 gigabytes RAM in the 512, so you might want to be sure before you order it. So this one also has the 512 and up to a terabyte worth of storage. So again, you have a few options. Now this one has a 50-50-40 megapixel camera. So the main is 50, the telephoto is a 50 megapixel, but it's a 3.5 times zoom, so that's a little different than the rest of them, giving you a little bit more advantage, and then a 40 megapixel ultra wide. Now both selfie cameras are 12 megapixel on this phone, so I think that's a really decent number. Now this is a little bit lower number on the battery. It's a 5150 milliamp hour battery, and they give you a 66 watt wire charging, which is very similar to the OnePlus Open, and the faster 50 watt wireless charging. So a lot of them are doing this wireless charging, and this one shows a 5 watt reverse wireless charging, which is something I've never really used on any of the phones because that's slow, and then you don't have your phone while you're charging something else. To me, that's not important and not a decision maker. Now this one comes with Android 14 and is upgradable to Android 15. Let me know if you have Android 15 on Honor Magic. I'd like to know. And their OS is Magic OS 9. Again, that's another OS I'm not familiar with. So my reservation on this phone, again, is it has a Snapdragon Gen 3. I would like the Elite if I'm going to spend that much money on another phone. Now, unfolded, this one's a little smaller than the previous ones. It's a 4.35 millimeter phone, so it's really thin, and 9.2 millimeters when it's folded. So this so far is the thinnest phone that we've come across in this list of phones. Now, even though it's thinner and smaller, it's still at 236 grams weight, and it could go up to 230 if you get, I guess, the larger storage or some other features. Now, this one also has the IPX8 water-resistant rating. So again, you could drop it in water and the phone should be all right, but I wouldn't make a habit of it. I want to take a quick second and thank you for tuning in, watching this video on foldables and what's available in 2025. Please do me a quick favor and smash that like button down below if you're getting something out of this video. It really does help out the channel so I can continue to bring you more reviews, tips, and tricks. Now that's out of the way, back to the video. Now, a lot of you said that the Huawei Mate X6 is a really good foldable. I really don't know much about that, but here's the specs. It's a 7.93 internal screen, so very similar to the rest. You might as well say it's an 8, and it's a 6.45-inch external screen. It's right on the border of some of these others being 6.4 and 6.5. So I suspect the feel in the hands could be very similar to the rest as far as the size of the phone. Now, this one has a different processor. This one has a Kirin 9020. I really don't know what that is, and I did not do the research on it. I'm sorry. You'd have to do that yourself. I don't know how that compares with the rest. I would assume it's a pretty fast phone. Now, this one also comes with 12 gigabytes or 16, depending on which of the model you get. There's the 256, 512, and 1 terabyte storage available on this phone. Now, this one also has a triple camera setup, except they're, again, a little different. This one has a 50, a 48, and a 40 megapixel ultra wide. Now, the 50 megapixel is the main. The 48 is actually their zoom, and it's a 4x zoom. So it's a little bit better than the rest, and probably the highest rated one out there so far with a 48 megapixel 4x zoom. Now, that one seems to be like the highest rated one on this entire list as far as the zoom camera goes. And I will explain myself when we get to the Pixel 9 Pro Fold. Now, this one has an 8 megapixel selfie cameras, very similar to what we're going to get at the new Oppo Find N5. So if any of you have that Huawei Mate X6, let us know. How are those selfie cameras? Now, this is on the lower spectrum as well for the battery. It's a 5110 milliamp hour battery. It does have 66 watts wired charging and 50 watts wireless charging. There you go again, 50 watts. And it has 7.5 watts reverse wireless charging, one of the higher ones there. Now, it has Harmony OS 4.3. Again, another one that I don't know of, so you have to do your research to see if that's anything. I think a lot of these are going to be Chinese only, so there may not be a US version of this. So you really got to think twice whether this is a phone for you. Now, this one is one of the thinner ones as well. It is a 4.6 millimeter unfolded and a 9.9 millimeter folded. So again, a little bit thinner than the rest of these, but not the thinnest phone out there. Now, it's a little bit on the heavy side, if you want to call that. It's 239 grams in weight, which is a little bit on the higher end, but I don't really think you feel the difference in hand on these phones. Now, again, this one has the IPX8 water resistant rating. Now, on to a familiar one, which is the Pixel 9 Pro Fold. This one has an 8-inch internal screen and a 6.3-inch external screen. So it's one of the smallest of all these foldables as far as the external screen goes. This phone only comes in 16 gigabytes of RAM, and it starts out you can get a 256 gigabyte storage up to a 512. Now, the cameras are one of the poorest of them all, although their processing is what makes the cameras really work. This one has a 48 megapixel main, a 10.8 megapixel 5x zoom, and then a 10.5 megapixel ultra wide. So the zoom on this is 5 times, so it's one of the highest of all foldables. However, it's only a 10 megapixel. And when I put that up against the 64 megapixels on the OnePlus Open, I think the OnePlus Open beats it at 6 times zoom or even 5 times zoom because it's just higher resolution. Now, when you go to processing on a Pixel, it just has the best processing out there. If these people could just get their processing on these other phones, then the megapixel count would really matter, because there's a lot of you out there that say that megapixel count does not matter. And I would agree with that to the most part when you just point and shoot and then look at the photo. But later, if you want to go in and process the photo more, do some zooming in on your computer or whatever, you're going to get a better result with higher megapixels. Now, the battery size on this phone is pretty small. It's a 4650 milliamp hour battery, and the charging is slow just as well, rated at 21 watts wired charging and 7.5 wireless, which to me doesn't make sense because it actually does charge a little bit faster than some of these other phones, even though the specs say differently. If you want to see a charging comparison on these phones, check out this video here. Now going back a little bit, I forgot to mention that this has a 10 megapixel selfie camera on both of them. So not really all that great, but it is more than the 8 megapixel. So there you have that. Now this one has pure Android. Android 15 is on the phone now, and it's typically the first phone to get Android or the Android update. Matter of fact, Android 16 is going to come out in the next month or two. So you may see the Pixel being one of the first phones to get Android 16. So if OS is important to you and being one of the first adapters, the Pixel would be the phone for you. Now, the Pixel Fold is 5.1 millimeters thin, unfolded, and 10.5 millimeters folded. So it is among the thicker ones, but of course, not the thickest. Now, I do believe it is the heaviest one out there, being 257 grams in weight. And you can feel the difference in weight in this one. Not enough to really make a difference in a decision, but it is there. Then, of course, it has IPX8, water resistant, just like the others. Now, here's another phone that I've heard from a few of you, which is the Xiaomi Mix Fold 4. It's a 7.9-inch internal screen, so about 8, and a 6.5-inch external screen. So they must have very low or minimal borders to be a larger external screen than most of them. Now, this one, again, comes with a Snapdragon 8 Gen 3, not the Elite. And then you also have the option of 12 gigabytes or 16 gigabytes of RAM, and the storage being 256, 512, or a terabyte. Now with this one, a little bit different with the cameras. They have a 50 megapixel main, a 50 megapixel 2x zoom, so it's a little lower than the rest, and then a 10 megapixel 5x zoom. So there you go. You have another 5x zoom shooter with that extra dedicated 2x zoom lens. Now the selfies on this one are both 16 megapixels. Now the Xiaomi is right there in the middle with the battery. It has a 5100 milliamp hour battery, 67 watts wired charging, and 50 watts wireless charging. Now, the phone comes with Android 14. I'm sure it's upgradable to 15. And again, if you have the phone, let me know if it's upgraded yet. And it has its own OI called Hyper OS. I don't really know, again, anything about it, so you have to do your research. Now, this one is among the thinner ones, being 4.6 millimeters open and 9.5 millimeters closed. I don't know how some of these numbers add up, because you would think you just multiply the open by the closed, but I guess some of them include the camera and some of them don't. Now this one's in the lighter category at 226 grams or 228 grams. I guess maybe that's depending on how much storage you get, whether it's larger or not. And this one, like the others, is IPX8 water resistant. Now this next one, the specs aren't really that great on this thing. However, the OS is one of the most preferred out of all the phones, and that would be the Samsung Galaxy Z Fold 6. Now this one has an internal screen of 7.6 inches and an external screen of 6.3, and although these are both 6.3, you can definitely tell they're not the same size as far as width goes. Now the Z Fold 6 has the Snapdragon Gen 3 in it, just like all the other phones, and it comes with 12 gigabytes of RAM, so it's one of the lower ones in the spectrum. And it doesn't matter which storage you get. You got 256, 512, or a terabyte, you still get 12 gigabytes of RAM. Now, I don't know why Samsung decided to go that route. Now, the cameras are a 50, a 10, and a 12. 50 main, 10 zoom, which is a 3x zoom, and 12 megapixel ultra wide. And then the selfie cameras are 10 megapixel. So as far as the camera goes, it has one of the lowest rating as far as specs. And then battery, it has the smallest battery out of all the phones with a 4400 milliamp hour battery and 25 watts wired charging, as well as 15 watts wireless charging. So this one has the lowest end as far as battery and charging out of all the phones. Except for the Pixel. On paper, the Pixel's slower. Now this phone has Android 14 on it. Should be getting Android 15 soon. And their skin is One UI 6. And One UI 7 is out, but hasn't reached the phone yet, and should reach the phone. Now they're saying April or May. So not quite sure what the delay is on there, but it is what it is. Now it has an IPX8 in dust and water resistance. So that rating just means it has some dust resistance and a little bit of water resistance. Honestly, I'd have to look that up to tell you where it sits with the other phones. But I do believe it's safe to say if you drop it in some water and get it immediately, it should be okay. Now, lastly, one of the other options you have is the OnePlus Open, and I really, truly believe that this is one of the better options. It's a 7.82-inch internal screen and a 6.3-inch external screen. So, of course, it's larger than the Z Fold, but smaller than a lot of the other competitors. Now, this is the older chip than all of them, having a Snapdragon 8 Gen 2. However, its speed, because of their design and their polish of their OS, is really fast and comparable to each other. Now, this one comes out in just one size as far as RAM goes. It's a 16 gigabytes of RAM, and it comes in a 512 or a 1 terabyte version with storage. Now, the cameras are one of the top of the industry. 48 megapixel main, 64 megapixel zoom lens, and a 48 megapixel ultra wide. Now, that zoom lens is a 3x zoom, so not quite up there as 5, but I have compared it to the 5x zoom lenses, and I really like its photo quality better. Now, the screen on the inside has a 20 megapixel selfie camera, and the one on the outer screen is a 32 megapixel camera, so you got high quality there as far as megapixel goes. But I have found that OnePlus does suffer a little bit with photo processing. They need to get a little bit better at that. Now, this phone in the box comes out with Android 13, but it is upgraded to Android 15 already and Oxygen OS 15. So this is the most upgraded phone out of all of them as far as the OS goes. Now, its battery isn't quite as large as some of the newer ones, but it is a 4,805 milliamp hour battery. You get 67 watts wire charging. There is no wireless charging on this phone, which is kind of a downside, but you do have that benefit of 67 watts wire charging, which is really fast. Now, unfolded, it's 5.8 millimeters thick, and folded is 11.8 millimeters thick, so it's one of the thicker of them all. But as you can see here, up against these others, it's very hard to tell. You could feel the drop off here, but not here. Now, this phone is 230 grams in weight, so it's the same weight as the Z Fold, and it has IPX4 splash resistant rating, so this is not something you want to immerse in water. Now, there's one more foldable that's coming that we know of and have some leaked specs on it, and we'll talk about that, and that is the Samsung Galaxy Z Fold 7. As far as we know, Samsung Z Fold 7 is going to be pretty much similar to the Z Fold SE that has already been released in Asia. And that phone basically is an 8-inch interior screen and a 6.5-inch exterior screen. So it's on the larger size as far as the exterior screen, which is quite a different turn for Samsung in their foldable. And they upgraded one of the cameras to a 200 megapixel, which is their main, matching that of the Samsung S25 Ultra. Other than that, the other two remain the same as far as a 10 megapixel zoom, which is a 3x zoom, and then a 12 megapixel ultra wide. Now, the SE version only has a 4400 milliamp battery, which is the same size the battery is in this. And that I don't understand because it's powering a larger internal screen and a larger external screen. So I don't quite understand why they didn't go with a larger battery when they have a whole much larger body to go along with it. Now, the Z Fold 6 has the S Pen that you could use on the interior screen, but the SE does not. It does not have a digitizer. Now, from what I understand, rumors are that the Z Fold 7 won't have a digitizer either, but they have developed a new pen that will actually work on the internal screen. Will it work on the external screen? That I don't know. I would hope that if it does work on the internal screen without a digitizer, it should work on the exterior screen without a digitizer. Now, the OnePlus Open, there is a pen you can get from Apple that works on both screens, the internal and external screen. That pen is very hard to get and expensive. Right now, I can see that on some third-party sites, they are listing the Apple Find-N pen at $190. That's ridiculously expensive, almost $200 just for the pen. That's why this reviewer has not gotten one yet, because they're really up there in price. So back to the Z Fold 7. It could come with an S Pen or have one available to work on it. We don't know. And my question would be, if the S Pen works on the Z Fold without a digitizer, will that pen work on other phones? Interesting thought. If anybody knows, let me know down in the comments. But as far as everything else right now suspected of the Z Fold 7, there's really no change. Although I think the assumption is it will have the 8 Elite chip in it, which will make that a little bit better than the SE. And the rumors that I've been seeing is next year is when Samsung is going to be doing its big leap in technology and making a lot of changes. And if that's the case and OnePlus follows through or comes through and brings out their device next year, well, we'll have a great competitor next year to it. Now, of all these phones, which one would I recommend someone coming new to the foldables? Well, if you're in the US, your best bet is probably to go with the Pixel 9 Pro, actually one of these three, the Pixel 9 Pro, the OnePlus, or the Z Fold 7. I would wait for that to get that larger screen. But if you want to talk about best value, the best value for your money is going to be the OnePlus Open because it's still available. And right now it's at a lower price simply because of the news and everything that's going out. So it's a great buy. Now, why would I say that this is better? Well, even the Z Fold 7 is rumored to come with 12 gigs of RAM. That's not enough. This thing's got 16. This one's got 16. And why do you need 16 gigabytes RAM? Well, these are made for multitasking. You got several apps open at once. You know, the more RAM, the better it multitasks. And when we're talking about multitasking, I believe that OnePlus has the best features for multitasking. I think it even beats out the Samsung. Samsung's right there is number 2 because you could also open up multiple apps. You could do 4 apps here. Where on the Pixel Fold, you can open up 2 full-size apps. You can do a third as long as it's a video player. And that works as a floating app and you can size it. But to really, truly open up multiple apps at the same time, it's these 2. Now, I've been asked many times, is the OnePlus Open slow because it has the 8 Gen 2? Well, no. It's actually really fast. Now, if you want to see how that Gen 2 and the OnePlus Open performs against these other foldables, check out this video here. Until next time, God bless.